Well, good afternoon, and again, thanks so much for taking the time to join us in this important conversation about artificial intelligence and the Latino workforce. My name is Nick Monroy. I'm a CHCI Public Policy Fellow, and I'll be your MC for this closing plenary. On behalf of CHCI, I'd like to thank Accenture, Amazon, and MasterCard for their generous support of this session. It's pretty remarkable how much AI has really exploded onto the mainstream. I feel like that's all anybody's really talking about these days, so I don't think there's any better discussion for us to close out this tech summit than with one about AI. And I was tempted to make a joke about how ChatGPT helped me write these welcoming remarks, but I think that's been a little overused, so I'll pass. But let's dive right in. It's my pleasure and honor to introduce the representative from New York's 13th Congressional District and CHCI Chair, Congressman Adriano Espaillat. Over the course of his career, Congressman Espaillat has dedicated himself to service. Early in his work life, he served as Manhattan Court Services Coordinator for the New York City Criminal Justice Agency. He later worked as Director of the Washington Heights Victim Services Community Office. Congressman Espaillat was elected to the New York State Assembly in 1996, where he chaired the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus and committees on small business and children and families. In the Assembly, he was an ardent and persistent advocate for tenants, consumers, veterans, immigrants, and local businesses. And he is not done yet. Elected to serve in the United States Congress in 2016, he continues his legislative work and his advocacy, and we're pleased to have him here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Adriano Espaillat.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to be at this summit, this tech summit. It's an important one for CHCI. I want to thank Marco and the team for helping put it together, and the panelists, all women. That's great. That is absolutely fantastic, and I am sure that you've had a robust discussion during this day about so many issues, particularly AI. And as you know, I'm proud to kick off the most important conversation during this year's CHCI Tech Summit, a conversation on artificial intelligence and the Latino workforce. Let me share some numbers with you. Some 35% of Latino households currently lack consistent access to home internet. 35% lack, resulting in a lack of access to devices and digital readiness. So this is a major challenge. How do we get that to, even after the Infrastructure and Jobs Act was passed, we still have 35% of our families that are not digital ready. So this is important. Several tech companies share of U.S. technical employers such as coders, right, who are Black and Latinos, increased by less than 1% from 2014 to 2019, a dismal increase. So we see how President Biden's agenda, as it pertains to the Infrastructure and Jobs Act and other pieces of the legislation, take into account social equity. It should not be any different for this room and for the folks in your families. So Hispanic workers are grossly underrepresented in STEM jobs. We are 8% of STEM workers, but 17% of workers overall. So much more needs to be done in this area. Fairness and equity is important. I have a resolution that calls for a regional, a hemispheric strategy so that we are not held to the biases and the inequities that have for far too long perpetrated other areas. This could be also something that happens as we move forward with the artificial intelligence revolution, right? There's no guarantees that it will not be biased and that you will not be part of it at the percentage and the proportions that you deserve to be part of. So we must develop a hemispheric strategy en English y en español también. So this is an important panel. This is an important gathering where we get some of the brightest, youngest, most active members in this terrain, or artificial intelligence, to help us lead the way. We saw how some of the CEOs of the biggest companies met with the White House and said, govern us, regulate us, provide the parameters, the guardrails, because this could be as serious as the next pandemic or a world war if not governed and provided the right guardrails to ensure that it is a tool for progress, not a tool for displacement, that it is a tool for equity and not discrimination, and that in fact it is a tool that propels the world to a better place for all of us. So this is so important. And your conversation today is timely because you're right at the center. You're right at the crossroad of this tremendous revolution that will be witnessed by generations even beyond you, and the impact that it could have on our planet. So thank you for being here today. We welcome your input, and we hope that some of the proposals that you bring forward are life-changing, and that this panel, led by women, and as you know, if you want something said, you give it to a man, but if you want something done, you give it to a woman. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Espaillat, for your words, for your support of this panel, and for your support of CHCI. Next, we will hear welcome remarks from Kendra Brown, Vice President of Public Policy and U.S. Federal Affairs for MasterCard. Through her work at MasterCard, Ms. Brown is part of the organization's team committed to bringing 1 billion people and 50 million micro and small businesses into the digital economy by 2025. She is also very much involved with MasterCard's In Solidarity programs, designed to help close the racial, wealth, and opportunity gaps that exist in our society today. Please welcome Ms. Kendra Brown.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to see each and every one of you. I greet Congressman Espaillat. I was Chief of Staff for Congressman Butterfield, and so worked very closely with Congressman Espaillat's staff. And I greet all of our panelists for today. I'm Kendra Brown, Vice President of Public Policy at MasterCard, here in our Washington, D.C. office, and also on the public policy team, but the Center for Inclusive Growth team also. As the AI revolution transforms the technological and economic landscape, it's important to focus on how the technology can be used to help people and what opportunities there could be to help build a more equitable workforce. MasterCard's commitment to financial inclusion and a more equitable financial system extends to the use of artificial intelligence, both as a technology that we harness in our products, but also the ways in which we educate our customers on safety and security within their financial ecosystem. At MasterCard, we believe that AI has the potential to promote economic well-being, but it is also critical that we be a principled, trustworthy user of this technology. We began our AI journey years ago, focusing on 2 tenets: safeguarding the payments ecosystem and fraud prevention. We deploy AI and data analytics to protect billions of transactions, 125 billion to be exact. Our cyber solutions prevent billions of dollars of fraud each and every year, with one of our solutions, SafetyNet, preventing over $20 billion of fraud over the past 12 months. AI has also been a game changer for helping us spot and identify patterns in fraud, including scams where the victim is coerced into authorizing payments from their own accounts. We know that as the workforce changes with AI innovation, it is critical to ensure these innovations are being used to foster inclusion and not add to exclusion. Thus, I thank you for having me today, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of the convening and all of the work that CHCI leads. So now I'll turn it over to our panel for a deeper dive into AI in the Latino workforce. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Brown, for that wonderful message and for all your support. It is now my privilege to introduce our moderator, Maria Curry. Maria is a technology policy reporter at Axios and the author of the Axios Pro Tech Policy Newsletter. She covers technology from Capitol Hill, including AI, industrial policy, and telecom. She has also written for Inside U.S. Trade, Bloomberg News, and Politico, among other media outlets. She is here today to facilitate and guide us through this most important discussion about AI and the Latino workforce. Please welcome our session moderator, Maria Curry.
All right. Can you all hear me okay? Great. Well, thank you, Nick, for that introduction, and thank you all for being here today. Artificial intelligence has been a huge part of coverage for me these days, and it's really an honor and special that we get to dive into how the technology is going to impact the Latino community specifically, because it won't be impacting everyone in the same ways, and it's important to be having these discussions. So there is a lot to get to this afternoon. Let's go ahead and get started by introducing our esteemed panelists today. Our first panelist, Laura Montoya, is founder and executive director of Excel Impact Organizations. She chairs and serves on several program committees for research workshops at artificial intelligence and machine learning conferences, and has led sessions on social impact, tech diversity, and ethical AI development across the country. Please welcome Laura Montoya. Our next panelist is Rebecca Gonzalez. Rebecca is the head of enablement for the Generative AI Innovation Center and Amazon Web Services Professional Services. She is a subject matter expert on responsible AI and is on the global board for the Latinos at Amazon Affinity Group. Join me in welcoming Ms. Rebecca Gonzalez. Our third panelist, Viv Pavon-Har, is the Chief Data Scientist and Director of the Applied Intelligence Discovery Lab for Accenture Federal Services. Pavon-Har is the author of several articles on various aspects of artificial intelligence, including research on geospatial analysis of deforestation in the Amazon and its impact on trade. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Viv Pavon-Har. And our fourth and final panelist today is Claudia Ruiz. Ms. Ruiz is a senior civil rights policy analyst at Unidos US. In her work, she focuses on addressing cross-cutting civil rights issues ranging from voting rights to anti-hate and policing reform to digital equity and tech accountability. Please join me in welcoming Claudia. All right, and then before we get to our first question, I did want to let you all know that we are going to be reviewing questions that you submit. You can submit them throughout the panel, and you can also post comments about this session at #CHCI Summit. So you can submit questions through the app, or you can use social media with this hashtag. And then in the end, when we have a Q&A, we'll be reviewing them and having you ask these questions. Okay, let's get started. So let's keep it broad to begin. How will AI interact with the workforce in general? Let's start with you.
Yes, so we are seeing a lot of changes, of course, over the last few years. Since the release of tools like ChatGPT, of course, more and more people are integrating artificial intelligence in their daily lives outside of things that happened in the background. So obviously, previously, we all utilized things like spam filters, for example, for our emails. Now we are purposefully using artificial intelligence tools in our regular white-collar work. But blue-collar workers are also considering how AI might be impacting them. In particular, a lot of Latinx people who are working within spaces like manufacturing or agriculture, retail, they're now seeing AI tools and robotics incorporated into their areas of work as well, and trying to decide how to essentially upskill or integrate with these machines. So it is a very interesting time to be talking about this, and very excited to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. So at this point in our development, I feel like AI is everywhere, right? And when we're working with customers, and even when I'm talking to my mom, we're talking about how AI is going to impact us. We're at the point where this powerful technology is available to everyone from our smartphones, from our computers. It's easily accessible, and because of the advances in NLPs, or natural language processing, you can use your natural questions and your natural voice to ask questions that are going to get you answers and are going to get you outputs that you would necessarily not be able to have gotten in the past. And so because of that proliferation and the accessibility, the power of these models is really going to impact everything, starting with productivity and moving on to really being able to enhance our human capabilities. And this is what makes me so excited, the ability to use this technology to be better. And it's very exciting.
Awesome. Good.
All right, everyone. Show of hands. How many of you used Netflix last night or checked your weather this morning? Thank you for using AI. It's everywhere. Rebecca, you said it perfectly, right? It's everywhere. And if you can't see it, of how it's filtering into everything that you're doing in your day-to-day lives, we're missing the point of how it's being impactful. And it's facilitating something as simple as what show will I like or will I not like? What show is it going to recommend, or which one I'm actually going to finish and watch the whole thing or not? Or even that pesky, are you still there? Are you still watching? Yes, I'm here. You know, it has those things. So it's everywhere in our day-to-day lives. Why not do that crossover to bring it into our day-to-day work? And I love how the panelists have already talked about how there's like a difference in where and how it's infiltrating. But I think our expectation and how it's going to change work should be that we should embrace it. It's coming in, and we should use it to facilitate things that have maybe been a little bit more mundane in the past.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so happy to be here. I'm also really grateful to all my other panelists because you covered some ground that I can, now shift away from. What I might do is kind of give you all a couple figures to chew on. I always find that helpful at the top of a conversation to really understand what are the numbers behind the ideas that we're talking about. And so between 2020 and 2030, about 78% of all new workers will be Latino. That's almost 80%. So when we're talking about, what will AI mean for the Latino workforce, we're actually also talking about what it will mean for the American workforce, what it will mean for the American economy, and therein what it will also mean for American democracy and society overall. And so as much as this is a conversation about the ways in which we can make sure that we're having the tech meet our workers where they're at, this also is a conversation about, I think, visibility and representation of Latinos, elevating our voices in the decisions around how these tools are designed, how they're deployed, and how they're governed long term. But it's also a discussion around, what do employers now moving forward really have to start thinking about when it comes to integrating these tools into their day-to-day business. Not only, again, from a workforce perspective, right, to ensure that they have an appropriately skilled and competent workforce from which to employ from, but it's also kind of on the consumer end as well, to make sure that the products that they are designing and ultimately deploying are also responsive and reflective of the lived realities of Latinos in particular, which are becoming rapidly, right, the biggest segment of our workforce and our racial or ethnic groups overall. So I just kind of wanted to tee that up. Happy to get started and delve into the conversation.
Yeah, great. So as the Congressman mentioned, unlike past technologies like social media, for example, we have these companies coming to Washington and saying, please regulate us, please set up some guardrails. And so we saw recently that President Biden signed an executive order that, among many other things, it's a sweeping executive order. It requires agencies to counter algorithmic bias, which we know is something that impacts our community in particular. And that includes in government contracts with the private sector. So can you talk about how algorithmic bias has historically impacted the Latino community and how impactful this executive order might be in your specific situations?
Sure, thank you very much. So there are some very obvious areas in which discrimination has been perpetuated from the use of AI and machine learning algorithms throughout history. We have seen that happen in hiring practices, for example, in loans. We had a wonderful representative here from MasterCard earlier who talked about issues around fraud But the banking institutions, unfortunately, didn't realize that these issues were a problem when they were developing their algorithms and deploying them to give people access to credit, right? So that's been a major issue for us. Also, unfortunately, within our system for penalizing people who have committed crimes, traditionally, obviously, the Hispanic population has been over-policed within different areas of our country. And so the bias has been shown to come up in these arrest rates that people have had. And so these machine learning algorithms, once they are applied in these areas through use by judges, traditionally they have been shown to say that an individual who identifies as Hispanic or Latinx or as Black should actually go away to jail for a longer term, or would be more likely to commit a crime again in the future. And so trying to break through some of those barriers where we use AI and machine learning based on data that isn't actually good data, right? Data that actually is harmful and is created because of systems that we've had in our country for years and years, this is something that has to change. And so this executive order, I think, will make a big difference as far as setting the tone to create that change. Thank you.
What I would love to talk about is the inherent bias that is really a part of our daily lives.
Yes.
And all the data that feeds into these models. If you are like me and not from a traditional tech background, there's one thing everyone will remember about computer science, right? It's that GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, right? So even if you are not a computer scientist, you'll understand that the data that we base all of these models on has an inherent bias. In our financial systems, to your point, you did a wonderful job, thank you, of touching all the places where this bias exists. But it is on us as an informed consumer to decide where we are using these models, where we sit at the table and talk about bias, how we mitigate it, because unfortunately, it's a reality, bias is everywhere. We have biases within us, we have biases in the data. It's not always bad and it's not always harmful, but unfortunately, there are many cases where it is harmful and can be used against different populations, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And so when we talk about mitigation, it's all about having guardrails in place in our development, and it's all about the holistic development, and really talking about bringing in non-traditional voices to make those decisions to decide where we are using AI and where we're not, and to make sure that we have our voices heard within our government, within our companies, and within our communities to talk about what we feel is acceptable and what isn't. And really, if you look at it from that perspective, we're empowered to decide what the data is used for and how. And then hopefully, when we talk about these holistic development practices, we can mitigate that bias.
So I find this actually a beautiful point for us to take like a pause and really evaluate what we're talking about. Because we're talking about models being biased. But you presented it perfectly. You know, when you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So the model's only going to be as good as what we've put in. So every time we say, well, this model is biased, what we're really saying is we've behaved in a biased way as society, and now we have a red flag saying, well, you guys are producing trash. And it's a great way for us to say, okay, pause. Let's look at this executive order. Let's see what we need to do to fix the way that we're evaluating things and actually produce something that is not garbage. And we have a great opportunity, and that's why I say this is a beautiful moment, because we get to revisit and reconsider how all of this is being presented. And so from a very technical, very data science point of view, a lot of what we have to do is take the models and break them apart. The model itself may be producing something great if what was input was great, but we have to now set the guardrails, set the tone, set different expectations of what we want to put out of it. And I'll give you a simple example. So we are using generative AI everywhere. I know it's the buzz, but this is not a fad. It's not going away, so get used to it, right? But we're using generative AI to look at hiring processes. And in this case, what we decided to use it internally in Accenture was, let's take a look at how we're building job postings. It is statistically known that a male will apply for a job even if they only meet 60% of the criteria, versus most females won't apply unless they meet 110% of the criteria. Right? So we were looking at these postings and we were saying, why don't we transform them and use what we've learned, what we've harnessed from large language models to change the tone so that more females will feel empowered to apply to a job. And we started doing the transformation, and when we ran it through the very first version of beta testing, the very first job posting was changing from said something manager, and it changed the word manager to lead. And I remember a lot of people in the room going, well, that's not relevant, that's ridiculous. And then everybody else going, no, like as a female, I feel better applying to something that says lead than something that says manager, because if I haven't had a manager role before, I won't apply to it. But if I know that my responsibility is to lead, I will. Right? So I think, I'm sorry, I'm getting super long-winded.
That's a great example.
But I think that this is a great way of us looking at how we can use executive orders in like a very applicable way of changing and really, truly using the models to actually perform and help us be better in the bias that we ourselves have to acknowledge. It just exists. So now let's change it.
I might kind of start with the executive order itself and also the OMB guidance that followed that very same week. And I think the executive order, I think first and foremost what it does is, and this is something that you all might have seen in the headlines, is right, it's demonstrating the fact that the government, the US government itself is willing to walk its own walk, right? By tasking agencies, by tasking its own institutions to really grapple with how do we rein in and regulate and oversee tech design and deployment. But I think that that's commendable. It is arguably, the EO is also arguably one of the I think it actually is the longest executive order that's been published, incredibly comprehensive. And so that was very positive to see. But I think that there's something else that I want to pick apart here, and that's that in addition to all of these other ways in which the tech itself can be biased, in terms of what we put into it, in terms of what outcomes it generates, there also is a lot of bias in how we make these decisions. And so bias can be, for example, when I was in the Kickoff AI Insight Forum that Leader Schumer has been hosting, one of the tech CEOs said, well, everybody knows how to use a computer, so we'll just democratize it. And as you heard the congressman say, right, just at the top of this conversation, no, sir, there are 35% of Latinos, right, who don't even have access to internet at home. In addition to that, there are 57% of Latinos that have low or no digital skills. And so we're over here talking about how we just, bring generative AI to the people and the people will come. And I think it's a false idea that this is a field of dreams, when really in reality we need to be structuring this new oversight, legislative and regulatory process in a way that actually is reflective of and responsive to the lived realities and unique vulnerabilities of our communities, which also happen to be, right, the ones that are the most impacted. And I think furthermore, I think the other kind of piece to this idea of bias, and this is something that I just wanted to tack on in addition to all the other ways in which AI has already generated a lot of biased outcomes for ourselves. And I think this also lends itself to an example about how our decisions around using AI can be biased is in the surveillance context and the ways in which we are allowing our government institutions completely unchecked to deploy and use AI-driven surveillance systems for ways in which we're not even necessarily totally sure are legal first and foremost, but that certainly at the very least are not transparent. And so that, I think, it's decisions like those, decisions around how the government uses technologies in that way. I think that's another really important highlight that I wanted to lift up out of the executive order. And in addition, right, all the other kind of rulemakings that the agencies are really tasked with having to develop. And now is our chance to uplift that voice, make sure that impacted community lens is included from the outset, so that once we actually have a first draft of these rules, again, that they are actually responsive and reflective of our community's needs and lived realities. I would like to add on that a little bit as well. So I think what's missing from the conversation at this point is how do we ensure that something like an executive order actually gets made into law and that actually carries over into our daily lives. There's this idea that we have around like hard laws and soft laws, and things like all of these executive orders and our alliances and so on that are put together. They do try to get companies and agencies to influence the citizens and individuals who are creating these systems, but there aren't many repercussions that happen if they don't follow suit, right? I would say the only real example of a law being put in place to protect people for things like surveillance and privacy is GDPR, right? And that didn't come from the US. And so I'm wondering myself how the US can essentially raise the bar or rise to the occasion where we are setting the tone for these kinds of things and showing that we're at the forefront of creating AI technology and utilizing this technology in a way that's going to benefit society and not just those higher up at these large corporations or higher up in the government that are deploying these systems worldwide.
It's a great point. I mean, we don't have a federal data privacy law in this country. Europe does. In the meantime, I mean, regulating tech historically hasn't been very successful in Congress. In the meantime, what else can companies do to mitigate harm? Viv gave one great example. Are there others that you could point to, maybe that your own company is doing to thwart the bias that could come from using these systems?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So one of the things that we always talk about when we talk about democratizing AI and ML is giving access. And the other thing is we also need to understand that education and educating everyone from corporate CEOs to just blue-collar workers we mentioned earlier, these are things that are going to help us reduce this harm and ensure that these things are in place. We really need to focus on human-centered development because what needs to be in the forefront of when we're deciding how and when to use these technologies is how is it going to affect people. And keeping that at the center of the conversation. When you keep the human that is going to be impacted, I mean, it's no secret that the people creating the algorithms and the people that are being impacted by the algorithms are not the same population, right? It's not the same. So we need to understand how we educate, how we bring these skills to everyone to be literate and to understand how the AI is impacting you. We talked about it earlier, right? AI is everywhere. But we need to be able to understand and make a decision on how it's going to impact our lives. When we take a holistic look at how we're developing this technology, that is when we win. When we can't use technology, I say this all the time, we can't use technology to solve a technology problem, right? We need people and processes in place that protect the users, that protect our communities, and that ensure that all of these, as these algorithms are being rolled out and as they impact communities, are doing it in the most fair and unbiased possible way.
Does anyone have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just say, well, I work at a nonprofit, but what we say to a lot of our corporate partners or companies and employers writ large is, we need you guys for partnership purposes, right? I think that it's an all hands on deck endeavor right now. And again, I think that's something else that the executive order demonstrated is that we need government, we need industry, but we also need civil society and authentic community voices in order to get this process done the right way from the beginning. And so that we have any hope of not only undoing all the harms that we're already living with, but that we can, foreclose any of the future ones down the line. And so partnerships is really where I think the rubber is going to hit the road. It is industry that is well versed in these tools, that creates them. And for example, at Unidos, we are the representative of authentic community voices, not only from the purposes of policy and advocacy, but also in terms of our affiliate network of nearly 300 community-based organizations who work day in and day out with the very people that need upskilling, reskilling, training, internet access, all the different services and needs that our affiliate partners are seeking to help fill. Working in partnership and collaboration with industry and with the private sector, I think, is really going to be key here, especially keeping in mind just how fast-paced this deployment and evolution process is. In some cases, we just have to realize that our existing regulatory processes may not be quick enough, they may not be nimble enough, and so we need to find more creative ways to kind of keep pace with the evolution of AI as we keep moving forward.
So, sorry. One of these, I want to really piggyback on this one because this is, I couldn't agree more with what you're talking about. I think this collaboration across industries is very important. And I also want to point out the fact that, data science as a degree I think only became available, what, maybe 5 years ago? And so this is new. This is new to everybody. But it's not new from a development standpoint because people found needs and started using computer science and using the zeros and the ones to create, you know, the algorithms that needed to happen from a mathematical standpoint to turn all of these things into reality. But we hadn't defined it. We hadn't defined it until very recently. So one of the things that I have found very critical to a lot of the development of the work that we do, because for the work that I do is very much related to helping federal agencies apply and implement appropriate AI, and analytics in general. And so some of the things that we really hone in on is this idea of a partnership. Partnerships with a lot of university institutions, nonprofits, think tanks, and things of those nature, because as much as we can come up with something really innovative and really cool and really exciting to come up with a solution, you better believe that there's another group somewhere out there that's devoting their life to doing the exact same thing. So why not join forces and make sure that what you're actually developing has been vetted and tested, but groups that may be completely different than yours. And so we, even though we're based here out of DC for our federal practice, we partner with universities all over the United States trying to pick brains across the board. And I literally mean it that way because we work with all these universities to make sure that we're bringing in the brightest ideas and voices from all across the country to be present at the same table.
I love what our fellow panelists have said so far. I think that the biggest point that needs to be made here is that representation is what matters, right? If you're going to make a difference within the computer science space, within bias, that representation matters. And a recent Pew Research study showed that specifically for Hispanic people, they seem to see people who are Hispanic achieving very highly in areas like the arts or areas like athletics, and not so highly in STEM fields. And this is a real serious problem. And so you find that for computer science degrees, for example, only 10% of Hispanics, or I'm sorry, only 10% of computer science degrees are being completed by those who identify as Hispanics. That's for bachelors. That number drops down to 7% for master's degrees, and then down to 5% for PhDs. And then if you look at individuals who are going on to become faculty within these research institutions, that number drops even lower, down to 2%, right? So this is very, very important. And so the problem isn't only existent there in academia, also in industry, right? We've seen this problem for such a long time. People of color are not represented within the tech field, within industry. And companies are trying to solve that problem, but for one reason or another, the needle hasn't moved. So this is a really big issue. And what I think, the other thing that is really important for us to acknowledge is that computer science is not the only thing you have to potentially research to be able to solve this problem, right? Those who are developing AI, who are implementing it into the workforce, aren't just workers, it's also business owners. And so what a lot of people don't recognize here in the US is that 82% of companies are started by Latinos. We are essentially one of the fastest growing groups that start companies in this country. And so today there are 5 million companies that are run by Latinx people. And yet they're not utilizing AI at the rate that they could be for their companies, even though they are utilizing it in their daily lives. And so this could try to help solve that problem if we can help people recognize that AI can be implemented in their corporations to solve problems, to drive innovation, to make more money, right? Then they can essentially excel beyond where they have been so far.
I also wanted to touch on another important piece of the executive order, which is this effort to modernize and streamline the immigration system for highly skilled immigrants. And I wanted to ask you, what does this mean for the highly skilled immigrants already in this country and those that would like to seek AI job opportunities here?
That's a great question. So one of the sets of programs that we work with and that we developed is the Latinx AI organization and programs. And so we work one-on-one with people all over the world, professionals who identify as Latinx, whether those are researchers, engineers, business owners, and other professionals in marketing or other areas of AI as well. And so for those who are immigrating into this country, I think a lot of people, when they hear the word immigrant, it's almost like a dirty word, right? Like it has a very bad connotation. But a lot of people don't realize that immigrants have done so much for this country, right? This country was founded by immigrants. Most of the largest companies within this country are run by immigrants from some country or another. And so in Latin America in particular, there are over 871,000 people doing STEM research and development, particularly those things that are applied to artificial intelligence engineering. Over 10,000 of those people are working on AI and deep tech startups within Latin America, okay? And about 5,000 of those are specifically focused on research and development within AI, okay? My organization, we have a group of 6,000 members. About 60% are in Latin American countries, and then 30% about here in the US, and then the other 10% are located in other places around the world. And so when you think about immigration, right, you can't just think about people that are coming here to do low-level jobs. You have to think about people that are very highly educated, that have completed their graduate degrees, and that want to come here and they want to contribute at a very high level to these areas as well. So that's an amazing opportunity for companies to find immigrants who can essentially solve this problem and help to contribute to the workforce and fill in those gaps that the tech companies are seeing or that academia is seeing as well. But for our organization in particular, I just want to highlight some of the programs we do, and then I'll let my panelists take over from there. So specifically, we focus on increasing that representation. We have mentorship programs, grant-making programs. We have a Journal of Latinx and AI Research, and we have a supercomputer network to try to break some of the barriers to doing high computational work by providing infrastructure. So whether that be cloud computing or hardware for members of our community, which solve the biggest problems that people have to doing work in AI right now. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, you can go next.
So the access to the upskilling and modernizing of the workforce is available. You just have to find it, and this is where we struggle, right? So we have an audacious goal, or what I consider an audacious goal, of giving 29 million people free web courses on cloud computing, not only AI, but just to understand the entire ecosystem. We want to do 29 million people by 2025 to have access to these. We have skill centers here in the DC area where you can make appointments and just walk in and take free courses around the technology. Now, the problem is, how do we scale that? How do we get the community to know about it? And this is why we do this. This is why I do this, right? I'm super passionate about making sure that everyone has access to this kind of technology. Immigrants and Latinos are the fire that drives our economy. To add to the wonderful things that you said so far, we Latinos alone, Latino-owned businesses, add $800 billion, with the B, dollars into the US economy every year. This is not an insignificant part of our businesses. So a lot of these Latinos are immigrants, some of them are not. Like I like to say about my family, we have been in South Texas for 5 generations, so we didn't immigrate. The border just basically crossed us. So we were there, then we became US citizens, so here we are. So the access is so important, and getting into our communities and having these conversations and talking about these skill sets to impact everyone is what I feel will help bring these new people to the table. Because the numbers about PhDs and STEM it's not great, and unfortunately it's not really getting a whole lot better. But when I speak, I like to talk about the fact that everyone's voice is important, and even if you don't have a computer science degree, access to these technology courses, access to these things can give you a seat at the table where you are direly needed.
So your question was, Maria, was what about, how do we feel about the opening of doors and how the executive order is allowing us to bring in more highly skilled individuals? And I think you guys have done an amazing job at talking about how do we level up and how do we empower people that might want a seat at this table. And so I want to take a little bit of a different spin to it. I want to talk about, the people that might be outside of the United States or that might be looking into this area and say this. The US does not have a national language. States do, but as a country, we don't have one. Well, universally speaking, globally speaking, coding is written in one language. If you're a Python coder, you code in English. If you're an R coder, you code in English. And so when we talk about bringing in and the openness of being able to allow for external or immigrants to come into the United States, I think that the power of AI is actually a little bit of a level setting because we write in the same language and we don't have to understand necessarily how we're speaking, but the model and the language and the data, it's gonna be universal. So I think this level sets things a little bit and it opens and empowers people. So in my world, this is great. The more the merrier.
Yeah, Claudia?
I'll just go quickly, and I might co-sign a lot of what Rebecca was saying earlier, is that I think viewing that piece of the executive order, it has to be a yes and, it cannot be a replacement for. And I think furthermore, I think that it would be a little short-sighted of us to look at that as the life-saving opportunity that's going to make us competitive forever. Because the reality is that we need to build that own infrastructure within our own educational systems and our own workforce and training systems here, so that they can be evergreen and that they can actually keep pace, like I was mentioning earlier, with the ways and directions and speed with which AI development and deployment is moving. So again, I would just say that I think I agree with the idea that the more the merrier, that the number of jobs, especially highly skilled jobs that are going to come out of this new wave of AI and generative AI, definitely. I think that it's also important to keep in mind that we also focus on closing the gaps that we have here. Because workforce needs all of us, again, especially Latinos. And as I mentioned, right, 78% of us are already gearing up to try to answer the calls that this new AI wave is putting on us. And so I think that, again, I would just say it has to be a both and. It cannot be seen as a replacement.
Right, and the thing about executive orders too, as you all know, is that they could easily be overturned by the next administration. And so really there's broad agreement that legislation is ultimately what is needed, whether it's an AI regulation or immigration legislation. Claudia, I know that you went to one of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's roundtables. Can you talk about what Congress needs to get right, especially when it comes to the Latino community, to make sure that these laws are effective?
Yeah, at Unidos, we kind of have three core pillars that make up our AI accountability platform or framework. The first is centered around constitutional values. So it's making sure that in our design standards that we spell out, that the EO kind of directed our agencies to do, that it directed NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, to start developing, making sure that those metrics and those standards are embedded with constitutional and democratic norms and values. That means protections from protections from discrimination, protections from bias, making sure that they cannot be used unchecked for surveillance purposes, and so on and so forth. And a big feature of that, at least from our point of view, looks at the specific design and architecture of these systems, including, as Viv has been really hammering, thankfully, away, our data inputs, our data design, and decisions around what is considered good, authentic data and what's not. Second is what we kind of shorthand for voices, so making sure that we are empowering impacted groups. Again, Latinos are our own impacted group just by virtue of being Latino, but we are also a different impacted group when it comes to the workforce application, or when it comes to an algorithm that's used in a lending or credit context, right? These are different use cases, and the reality is that the profile of the impacted community switches. Though at the undercurrent, again, by virtue of being Latino, we will always be one of the first and foremost impacted communities. So it's making sure that there's a lot of robust investment and cognizance around elevating and empowering those voices and making sure that they're involved in the consultation process for designing, developing, deploying, again, from soup to nuts, from soup to nuts, from beginning to end, making sure that we have a meaningful seat at the table whenever these decisions are being made. And then third and last, and it kind of complements those first two pieces, is this idea of investment, concerted investment and resource investment in the needs that communities need, in particular Latinos, in order to go peer-to-peer when these decisions are being made, under Pillar 2, but also to make sure that we are resourced and have the capacity in order to actually adopt these tools meaningfully, and that we can, that our workforce, in the context of our workforce, to make sure that we are equipping our employees and our Latino workforce with the skills and the access they really need in order to actually meaningfully take advantage of these jobs. And right now, that's really a critical concern of ours right now. Again, I'm obsessed with the factoid that 35% of us don't have internet, and I cannot believe that I have to go talk to some of our community members about AI when this is a reality. So making sure that we're addressing those needs early on and upfront is part and parcel of making sure that we can have evergreen AI and maintain, such an innovative and kind of leading stance globally when it comes to AI.
You want to take that one next?
Yeah, you've made a really good point about the idea that investment is needed into our communities in order for AI to prosper. Currently, around investment, only 1% to 2% of all venture capital funding goes to Hispanic or Latino identified entrepreneurs. And so even regardless of that, there are still some really notable companies that have been produced by Latinx people here in the US. For example, Duolingo, an app that we all probably use for one reason or another, is a really big one. If you're in the startup space, Brex is another one, right? They're a really cool banking company. If you haven't heard of it, was started by some Brazilians, for example. There's also BetterUp, is an amazing company. And if you are an engineer, you're probably familiar with Auth0, right, which is another great company with founders that are originally from Argentina. So these are, amazing companies that have raised over $100 million. So they are breaking the odds, and I think there should be recognition of that and more opportunities given to people so that they can rise to that level and can create amazing corporations utilizing AI and machine learning technology where they haven't been able to before. I know that the Small Business Administration is doing what they can to assist people who identify, as Hispanic or Latino in this country, but it's obviously not enough. More needs to be done to help connect those and to invest in those to ensure that they are going to be successful long term.
I'll say one thing. You guys have heard a lot of stats your way today. You couldn't expect anything different from a panel like this. But there's a couple of things that I want to connect the dots on. So we talked about the fact that there were, what did the congressman say, about 50 executives the day that President Biden signed the executive order in that room. I know your CEO was there, mine was there. And we've talked about how few Latinos are joining these C-suite opportunities and things of this nature. And then we've addressed the fact of we need to have more voices, right? So how do we make sure that the next time this comes around, we actually enforce it? Well, we keep telling and we keep pushing people to move up. We keep empowering Latinos to take roles in these organizations. We keep talking to each other and lifting each other up so that our voices are heard. And then we keep encouraging our leadership from a business perspective to value it so that when the congressional hearings come around or whatever, the executive orders are again up for grabs, we say, look, we've already decided that this is a good thing. This is already in place. Let's keep at it because the people that are using it or launching it or implementing it have already started to promote it. This is from that level. I think everything else that everybody has said has been amazing if we don't empower and lift the whole group, we're going to get left behind.
And I might say just to add, to further that is that, now I think it's, in the AI conversation, it's especially clear is that, the values of, inclusion and diversity and equity right? These are no longer just nice to haves. These aren't just moral imperatives. They are truly economic imperatives. If we really want the industry to continue to move forward in the ways in which we envision it, we have to be diverse. We have to include Latino voices, Black voices, impacted voices from the very beginning, and it's far too long overdue that we start doing that, but we need to do it more meaningfully, more intentionally, in ways that are much more holistic.
Then if we could just illustrate and dig more deeply into how AI will impact the Latino community specifically. What types of jobs would be replaced, and how are people going to be impacted? To what extent is that going to take place? Start. Yeah.
Sure. So a lot of what we've actually found is that the fear around AI replacing jobs is not actually realistic. The way in which AI is being rolled out and implemented in the workforce, more often than not, these technologies are being used as a tool, and they're being used to enhance workers' capabilities. So things like, robotics for doing the like dirty D jobs, right? The jobs that are considered already potentially ones that you don't want to be doing, right? Jobs that are like a janitorial job, right? Cleaning the floors. You now have robots in like Lowe's, for example, that are doing this. Or jobs that are like checking inventory stock at retail companies, right? Most people don't want that job necessarily, or it's something that maybe you thought about doing in high school. Jobs like, picking fruit in a field. These are jobs that are backbreaking, and oftentimes they are last resort jobs, right? Things that people who do immigrate to this country have to do because they have no other choice, because they're not given the right to work, and they're not given the opportunity or recognized for other skills that they might have potentially. So where we see AI being implemented the most, as I mentioned earlier, is generally behind the scenes. AI has been around for a really long time, even whether you knew about it or not. Since the 50s, people have been talking about the cognitive enhancement areas, connectivity, right? Big data in the digital age. This has been something that's been in the works in all areas, including healthcare, in communications, and in everything. So I don't think people need to fear AI replacing their jobs necessarily. I think the conversation needs to be more about how can we ensure that we are helping those that need it the most to utilize artificial intelligence in a way that is going to be beneficial rather than harmful, and to ensure that that representation continues to be positive as well for our community members. And for me, I think personally with our organization, the way that we're tackling this problem, aside from those programs I mentioned earlier, is through the partnership between the Latinx and AI organization and my other company, Excel Impact Ventures. We're actually launching a fund specifically to invest in Latinx-led startups that are focused on AI and deep tech technologies, and those that will have a positive impact in the world. So solving problems like ending hunger, for example, or health tech issues. These are all the types of companies we would specifically invest in. So for everyday workers, I think you should stop thinking about, will AI replace me? And how can I use AI to free up my time to do a better job and to help other people?
Yeah, absolutely. +1 to everything Laura just said.
Thank you.
And absolutely, we talked about human enhancement and human skill enhancement. And one of the things I want to talk about is it is going to change the way we work. There's no way around that. Like every advancement in technology has changed the way we work. Someone made a very funny point the other day on a conversation we were having. I did not know that this job existed before, but apparently in the 1800s, someone would walk around with a stick and they would knock on your window to wake you up before there was alarms. So there was a person whose job was to walk around and hit your windows to wake you up to go to work. Now, I'm pretty sure no one wants that job. It doesn't exist anymore, obviously, but when we talk about these new jobs, to your point about robotics, of course we have robotics in our fulfillment center, and I believe it created 700 new job codes to manage the robotics. So even though robots did take some people's jobs, there were 700 new categories that these people could move into based on their upskilling around their jobs and their experience, their lived experience being part of that job. The one job around generative AI that I love to talk about is prompt engineering. Now, everybody in this room probably thinks, or maybe some of you think, that you have to be an engineer to be a prompt engineer. You absolutely do not. The one thing you need to know to be a prompt engineer is you need to know how to ask a good question. You need to know how to say, this question gave me the wrong thing. I don't necessarily want that. For example, I tried to get one of our models to create an image of a mariachi band that sang songs about technology. And then I made a sound that sounded like Vicente Fernández meets Daft Punk. I was totally into it. But I asked it to make an image for my album cover for my mariachi band that sang songs about generative AI. It did not work. And you can probably imagine why. There's not a whole lot of mariachi band data that's been put into some generative AI models, but single-handedly, I think I've solved that because I hammered on that model until I got a perfect image of a techno mariachi band, and it made me very happy, and I showed it to everyone on the Latinos board, and they were like, Rebecca, what are you doing? But, so you don't have to be an engineer to be a prompt engineer, you just have to know how to ask the right question, and because these models learn when you correct it and you ask it, no, I would like it more diverse. No, I would like more color. No, you can actually, in your own natural language, get the models to output what you're looking for.
And you can ask it in any language.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what I want to hammer down on. Yes, all of our jobs are going to change. Absolutely. I want them to. I don't want to have to Google search, copy, paste, a lot of things.
PowerPoints. PowerPoints.
Oh my gosh. I wanted to generate that for me because I want to start with a red pen, not a black pen. I don't want to have to start writing the document that's already like, we all know what should be in there. I want to just go in to validate. I want to free up my time to do the exciting things, not the mundane, repetitive stuff. So bring it.
I might take the privilege of slightly disagreeing and pushing back a little bit on this idea about, automation as a form of displacement is a total myth, because I think, as your stick example actually kind of shows, that there is the possibility of eliminating certain jobs, right? Though, which, by the way, I think I might actually wake up on time if I had somebody rather than my alarm that I turn off myself. And I think the key here, though, is not necessarily emphasizing the fact that there will inevitably be some level of displacement and disruption, but looking at, okay, now what did that person, the human alarm, what were their options now that that job was eliminated? And that's where that investment, community investment piece comes in. And that's where the emphasis on having to upskill, reskill, skill from the beginning, skill sideways, all across the board. That's why that is such a core pillar and something that we need to be focusing on right now, while we're still kind of in the earlier stages of this AI and tech wave. And I think that example reminds me of another story that I actually really appreciated when somebody was talking about generative AI. And it was the idea of, do you remember how elevators used to be operated by people? And then when they became automatic, it was actually that nobody wanted to use them because they were terrified of it, that it wouldn't work. They didn't trust it, right? So this story kind of does two things here. One, it again captures the idea that, right, the job of an elevator operator was eliminated, right? So that's one example of how displacement can happen, but displacement doesn't have to be the end of the road if we have adequate investment in resources and opportunities available to fill that gap. But on the other hand is that, again, going back to kind of something I said earlier, is that technology is not a field of dreams. Like if you build it, we will not come. And I think the elevator story really demonstrates that, where even if you have this really powerful, innovative, brand new way of doing something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to assuage and completely squash any kind of fears or hesitations that communities that, by the way, have already been left out of tech, right, for the most part, right, that they're going to have. So there does need to be that concerted investment, outreach, and engagement early on. And again, I think we're already long overdue in order to make sure that, right, these fears around displacement as a result of automation are kind of addressed meaningfully.
Great. All right, well, that is all the time we have for our panelist questions, and we're going to move on to audience Q&A. So I will let our friend here.
Thank you to those who submitted questions via the app. We're going to kick off with the first question being, nonprofits have vocalized how AI biases and research needs to be done by more than just corporations themselves. Can you speak to the responsibility of corporations in AI and what the public sector can do to assist them?
Did you catch that? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question was, can you speak to what corporations can do and how the public sector can assist them in modifying AI? Is that correct?
Yes, the biases of AI.
Modifying biases in artificial intelligence. So that is part of what our nonprofit organization does currently. So we partner with many large corporations. Some of our major partnerships include Google Research, for example, Meta. We've partnered with Amazon. We've partnered with Salesforce. We've partnered with Apple. And that part of those goals, part of those partnerships is around increasing representation and ensuring that there are more Latinx identified workers in their companies working on algorithms, developing AI and machine learning so that they have the opportunity to recognize those biases and to make changes for a better future from within these corporations. So I think outside of that, becoming essentially a deal or source flow for workers, we have also produced research to better understand Latin Americans in the US as well as in other countries, and how AI is going to affect them specifically, and what it takes for an individual, a corporation, or a government entity to be ready for artificial intelligence. Our first research on that topic was published in 2019, and we found that a lot of the issues that are being faced are some of what's been talked about in the panel today. In particular, a lot of it's just not understanding the technology. Fear about the technology, as was discussed, has been a major barrier. And I think that's part of, if you really think about where bias comes from, where it stems from fear and not understanding and essentially ignorance around what another culture or what another community represents or how they can add value or what they can bring to the table. So I think if we can essentially cross some of those barriers and help people understand that we are all human, we have the same rights, we have the same values, we have the same wants in society and in the world, and that people coming from other countries are not dangerous, right? We just want for a better life. I think that is what's most important for bridging that gap between nonprofits and corporations on this issue of bias in AI.
I'm just going to say something that's been said along the entire time we've been up here, and it's just making sure that that all voices are heard. I think that once corporations continue to hire more diverse individuals and we continue to all work together, that is what's really going to drive a lot of this bias being identified, because in a lot of cases, if it's one group that looks one particular way and one has a particular background, they won't know the difference. Once you diversify that group and bring in more voices and let everyone have an equal stake, then that comes up and then it can be corrected. It's also acknowledging the fact that it's happening.
Yeah, I always like to shorthand that very fact is like you can't know what you don't know. And once we accept that that happens to all of us individually, right, that's how we're really going to be able to become truly innovative, I think, and inclusive as well. I'll get really concrete just with a really quick answer, and that's that right now nonprofits, as the executive order directed agencies to start developing their own rules and standards and governance sort of frameworks around using AI themselves. There will be open periods for comment, open periods to engage the agencies themselves to talk about what a rule should look like, what should it include, what should it maybe not include, who should it apply to, and so on and so forth. And so that's, at least at Unidos, that's one area that we're really gearing up to get, really engaged, and we're really encouraging all of our sister organizations in civil society and any grassroots organizations that, again, can speak to this lived experience of the ways in which Latinos in particular live day to day, but also in which they experience technology. That's really, it's going to be a crucial moment where the rubber hits the road in terms of regulation and oversight.
Thank you. I'd like to remind attendees that they can raise their hand to get a mic over to you to ask any questions of the panelists, or I'll continue via the app.
We have one right here.
Beautiful hand went up real quickly.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Karen Suarez Jimenez, and I am the CHCI Postgraduate Law Fellow, sponsored by PepsiCo, and I work for the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. It's the committee with the broadest jurisdiction in the Senate, covering everything from water rights to tax issues, and now the development of AI legislation and regulation for the 570 plus federally recognized tribes, as well as state recognized tribes. We're hearing a lot of emphasis on concerns regarding data sovereignty and data ownership. So beyond or in addition to a federal privacy law, what recommendations would you make to develop policies that protect data in Latina communities while also allowing ethical use of this data to support Latina communities?
Great question. Yeah.
So my organization, XLAI Institute, actually just published some research on this topic on combining the indigenous data sovereignty with the CARE principles. So the CARE principles, I think, are really invaluable in understanding how colonialism is essentially being perpetuated as well through the use of data of individuals who are non-consenting necessarily and who are not benefiting from the use of their data, in the same way that in the past colonialism has been used against indigenous people to take over their land, to utilize natural resources. So I think that this is a really important topic that needs to be addressed, especially because indigenous communities do not have a voice, right? They are such a small percentage of the population. Here in the US, most often than not, they lack access to things like internet and have no idea on how they're being depicted within the media, within larger groups. And so fortunately, there are organizations that are working to try to solve this problem. One that I really appreciate is an affiliate organization to ours, Latinx and AI. It's called Indigenous in AI. They're actually a collective of indigenous communities from around the world who are trying to use artificial intelligence to solve problems for their communities. So these are people who are, of course, graduate level within computer science or professors at universities, and they are seeing great results so far through the use of this technology. They have found similarly, unfortunately, that because even though they come from these communities, oftentimes they're still seen as outsiders because they have gone on to work professionally in different areas, and because they utilize technology in a way that has been unseen to a lot of these indigenous communities in the past. And so there will be, unfortunately, still a longer time period in order to ensure that you gain people's trust, right? Traditionally in the past, due to colonization, indigenous communities have not trusted people that are coming in to do research, or who say that they, even from nonprofits, who say that they are trying to create programs that are for the benefit of these communities. In the past, oftentimes these programs have even done more harm to these communities than good. And so when it comes to IDSolve, or Indigenous Data Sovereignty, the idea is to really keep the ownership of the data with the individuals that produce it, to give them back the power of that data, and to teach them how to use it in a way that would be beneficial.
All right, did any of our other panelists want to take that one? No, all set. I think that's all the time we have, actually, but thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. It's really a privilege to be able to talk about this issue and how it impacts our community specifically. Thank you again to our panelists, to CHCI, to our sponsors. And I think we have one final segment left, if Nick.
Let's thank our illustrious panel. Thank you very much for your insights, for your commentary, for your educating the audience. I heard folks in the back of the room nodding and commenting on how much they learned in this session. So thank you very much for that session. Sorry, apologies for being late. I missed the transition from the session to closing out the summit, because that has been our last formal programming engagement. And so I'm just here to thank you for joining us today, for being a part of all of our conversations throughout the day. We really appreciate your participation, your engagement, all of your comments, your questions.
I want to thank all of our sponsors. I want to thank our partners. Their generous support is what makes our organization function. It's what makes an event like this possible. It's what makes our programs possible. And so we really appreciate all the work that you do. And I especially want to thank our summit host sponsor, Amazon, who stepped up in a real leadership level to ensure that this summit was successful. And so we're grateful for all of that support. I also want to thank all of our speakers, our panelists, our moderators, our MCs for the day, and of course our members of Congress who joined us today. We really appreciate all of your insightful comments, the conversations, the critical points you've shared with folks throughout the day. I've seen some of the social media chatter, and again, I think there's been a lot of learning that's happened today, and so we're really grateful for that. And I want to thank each of you for being here with us. I want to thank you for joining CHCI on our mission to develop the next generation of Latino leaders, in part by fostering these really critical and necessary conversations around the technology space. Lastly, I want to thank the CHCI Board of Directors, some of whom are here with us today, the CHCI Advisory Council members, some of whom are here with us today, for their leadership. And I want to take a special moment at the end of a day like this to thank the incredibly hardworking, the incredibly thankless, the incredibly tireless CHCI staff who actually do all of the real heavy lifting to put an event like this together. Some of them are here. Many of them have already moved on to pack up. So if you see them, please thank them. Please tell them what an enjoyable time you had today. If you had anything less than a stellar experience, please come see me. Do not mention to them. They worked their hardest. Any mistake that was made, I guarantee you, was my fault, not theirs. So please come bring that to me. We've had a record year in terms of attendance at CHCI events, and that speaks to the need for convenings like this, for bringing together leaders from the public sector, from the private sector, from the nonprofit sector, to talk about the issues that are being faced by our community and by the nation. And whenever I talk about CHCI and about our convening, I remind people that increasingly, in fact, as it ever was, the issues that our community faces are the very same issues that our nation overall faces. And so that's why it's important, in fact, it's necessary that we be at the table, that we be a part of those conversations, and ideally, that we be in decision-making positions to help direct the policies, to help direct the resources, to help make the actions that are needed happen so that our community is not only not forgotten, but in fact integrated into the path forward for the success, not just of our own community, but for the nation and for society overall. So please continue your conversations. Please continue to speak up and represent our community. Please continue to advocate for our needs. And not just our participants, but most especially our participants. Continue to take on the leadership roles that you deserve. Continue to take up the space, as the young people say, that we deserve in our society, again, so that we can make a better world, not just for us, but for everyone. And you can continue to stay in touch with us by engaging on social media. You can find us at CHCI on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and all other platforms. You can also find us at CHCIDC on Instagram. Remember to use the hashtag CHCI Summit. And although the formal program has concluded, there's still time for you to continue to make connections, for you to leverage everything you've learned and heard today by joining us at our closing networking reception, sponsored by our good friends at Verizon, right outside here in the room. So we'll see you out there in just a couple of minutes. Have a good afternoon.